Hey, sir, can you hear me?
I can. Good morning
Hot
or after.
dog.
I guess you're in Oklahoma time, right? So you
Yeah,
can
it's still morning.
morning. Okay. If you've been up since like 5 or 6, this could be evening by now. So how are
Yeah, that's
you?
true.
How's the world in Oklahoma?
It's getting hot. It's summertime. Texas, same way.
Yeah, yeah, down in here, man. It's like it was about 2 weeks ago when the weather was like kind of nice in the morning, maybe in the something, and it just jumped, man. It was like, oh, it's hot. Summer is definitely here now. So yeah, I felt that.
That is true. It's true. But my husband we put in a pool, like an above ground pool last year,
I'm
but then it
so
rained for a month after we put it in. So it was just a mess, around it. And so this year for Mother's Day, he built me a deck. So it's quite lovely. We're enjoying that.
good. Good, good, good.
It's a good
Well,
man.
yeah,
It's a good man to
yeah.
build you a deck for
No,
Mother's
he
Day.
built he makes it hard for all of us other guys who didn't build a deck, you know what I'm saying? So
Right.
that's
That's
respected though. That's
exactly right.
good husband points there for sure.
Yeah.
Well, you know how these work. We'll let the audience build here for a second. Just
Yeah.
I think you know, Doc, but I just called you Doc. I always like that for my doctor friends, Doc.
That's
But
fine.
we're going Facebook Live with it, so hopefully we'll get
Mhm.
some audience joining us on Facebook Live, and we're also recording this so that later it will be able to use it again and help more people kind of pull into your world and my world about foster care and the church and working together and stuff like that. So I'm going to start kind of doing introductions. You good to kind of get me or for us to start jumping in? Okay. Um, for all those watching, thanks for joining us. Again, I don't know where you're joining us from. If you're on parts of the country, it could definitely be morning. If you're other parts of the country, it could be afternoon or world evening for that matter. But thanks for joining us. We would love for you to feel free to send questions to us. If you're joining us through the Zoom webinar, you can chat those. One of our team members is going to be on there, kind of helping facilitate questions throughout Dr. Deb and I's conversation. If you're on Facebook Live, feel free to post those questions there. If we can't answer them now, we can definitely try to answer them later, but we'd love to hear your questions just to keep you in the conversation. I want the audience to know how much Backyard Orphans is a fan of Dr. Deb and the thousands of employees in child welfare around the nation that serve over 400,000 kids. Just for context, Dr. Deb, how many child welfare team members are there in Oklahoma?
Yeah, we have about 3,000 child welfare staff, and about 2,000 of those, or 2,200 of those, are serving really on the front lines out in the field working with families.
So when you think about, in a sense, she's representing the 3,000 there in Texas down there. We have, I was told the other day, it used to be 9,000. We're up to almost 13,000
Hmm.
staff members. Guys, that's just 2 states right there. There are thousands of employees. So she's not necessarily speaking to all, for all of them, but some of the perspective you're going to hear, I'm so excited. It is taking one state and kind of saying, this is probably a similar conversation that the entire nation of child welfare is thinking about or considering going into this. So let me tell you my heart. When I was jumping into this space as Backyard Orphans, and our mission, our vision is to see a day where there's more families waiting for children than children waiting for families. But our mission is that local church would build this ministry of foster care and adoption and orphan care and support inside the church and be the solution that we believe we are biblically mandated, and Dr. Deb's team is legally mandated to protect kids. And when God was pulling me into this, I was like, just jumping in and equipping the church, helping the church, and God was like, no, I want you to work with the government. I was like, whoa, time out. Like, there's this separation in the sand, God, where church and state, and God was like, I don't remember making that line. And I was like, oh, uh, God, you're going to have to unpack that for me. He said, well, just walk a mile in their shoes. And so over the last 8 years, guys, I've had the opportunity of hanging out with so many local heroes that we're talking about in child welfare. Dr. Deb is one of them, and she and I have had opportunities to hang out, break bread together, be teaching in churches and different organizations together. She is one of our finest. And this is what God told me to do, is to just talk to them, get to know them, like, befriend them, and realize they're human. Because here's what we know. Sometimes media can have a tendency, and I love media. I think media is a great platform to tell good stories and to highlight things, but sometimes media can highlight the lowlights, and then they're there. We know that they're in community. But I would say most of the time, media highlights the lowlights of child welfare. I don't see the thousands of kids that the lives were changed forever because they found them a safe and great quality home for them to be placed into. You don't hear those stories as much. You hear the mistakes. And I just thought, what if that was flipped? Like local heroes in our world, like first responders, like firefighters, for example. I think every young boy wanted to be a firefighter one day, and what if the media highlight the lowlights of fire? That'd be sad. But instead, media highlights the highlights. The firefighters rushed into the building. They put out the fire, and they rescued these people. And that's the way it should be. And if we highlighted the highlights of child welfare, which I guess we're trying to do today, is highlight the highlights, how would that narrative change? So if we understand that child welfare is here to bring safety, protection to children, and instead of maybe sometimes the community or church or whatever demonizing child welfare, we want to humanize them and say, no, guys, they're not in it for the money, right? They're not in it because they like 300 pages of what not to do with minimum standards. They're in it
Right.
because they love kids. And for every child welfare worker who doesn't do their job right and makes a mistake, I could find you a Christian who didn't do their job right and made a mistake. For every child welfare story that hits the local news for doing something they shouldn't, I could find you a pastor that hit the local news for doing something they shouldn't. So some of our journey with Backyard Orphans is to say, guys, we're on common ground here. We get to work together for the sake of the kids. They're great at law and protection and safety, and we're great at family. And if we work together, man, we could really help kids. So Dr. Deb, that's our heart. I know you know that. You've heard me say, you could probably say that for me. You've heard me say it so much. I want our audience to hear that. But I'd love to introduce you guys a friend of mine, Dr. Deb Shropshire. She's a pediatrician, so that's the doctor part, an associate professor at Children's Hospital at Boomer Sooner, OUHSC. She joined the Oklahoma Department of Human Services and Child Welfare Division in 2014, was named director, the big dog right there, in June in 2019. Her advocacy and heart for traumatized children and families has been nationally recognized. I love some of these goals right here that you have, Dr. Deb, for child welfare in Oklahoma, to equip and empower families to provide a safe home for their children. If every child in foster care can meet specific needs that they have. And then that third one, to ensure that every child and youth has a family or the supports they need to grow and develop. What great goals. Thank you for who you are, what you're doing. Thank you for being on our call today. Would you like to say hello and greet everybody and maybe answer this fun question? Now that the world is starting to open, personally, what is that one thing you're like, oh, I can't wait to do this? So say hello.
Hi. Well, thank you guys for having me so much. I'm really thrilled to get to be with you today. And whoever wrote that nice introduction for you, I should make sure and take them a sonic drink or something like that, because they make me sound better than sometimes I think I am. But those goals that you mentioned are actually what we are calling our True North. Our agency has been under new leadership over the past year and really spent time across every division, not just child welfare, but our safety net division, our division that serves adults, elderly adults, and things like that, saying, hey, what are the things that if we got these 2 or 3 things right, would most serve the people in our state. And those were the goals that for child welfare that we settled on, and I think they're exactly right. If we get nothing else right, but we get those 3 things right, we will feel like we have served our mission well. It's funny that you mentioned sort of the separation of church and state, because my dad was a pastor growing up, and so I grew up in the church. And when I sort of fell in love with the world of child abuse and foster care and the systems that serve in that space, the first place I tried to go interact with was the church, and I felt like actually the Lord was moving me back toward the state. And so I think one thing that's important to remember is a lot of the same people who are sitting in the pews on Sunday are doing the work of child welfare on Monday. And so this is not there's not a separation in us individually between the work that our hands has been given to do in our hearts. And so anyway, it's just important to keep that in mind as folks are thinking about the world of child welfare in the state. So the one thing that I have really missed and I'm looking forward to is sports. Oh my gosh, there's nothing on television. I literally watched I'm watching European soccer and stuff like that, like whatever's on right now, because I just missed football. I even watched like a NASCAR race with no audience, the other day, because I was like, I just got to have some kind of sports. And I'm a little nervous about what the sporting world is going to look like in the fall, but I need football to start. It's the only reason I can make it through the hot Oklahoma summers.
Totally. I love that answer. Trish, my wife and I, we've continued dating, through COVID, 20 years of marriage, but we were in our car eating some, curbside meal or something. But once like a restaurant opened, we hit here in Dallas, Fort Worth, the TVs were on, right? And it was the funniest thing as I kind of watched myself, when you're on a date, like, you're with your spouse, you're not supposed to like look up and watch television, but my instinct, like I looked up and saw like sports on 2 televisions. I was like, are we back? No, it was like some old game, like they're just replaying, and I was like, and I kind of like went sad again. So I'm with you. I definitely want to, I can't wait till some sports come back. But, with all these conveniences, like being able to watch sports or restaurants, that we miss, I know it's a season. That has already been really heavy for our kiddos throughout the nation. So talk now, Deb. Let us into your world a little bit. Some of the questions that we have here, like the first one is the pivoting. It's kind of the leadership buzzword. We've all had to pivot. How has your team pivoted to keep things moving to help kids in this season?
Yeah, so the world changed for us here kind of in the Midwest, really on March 11th, which was the day of the famous sort of Thunder and Utah Jazz game where the Thunder players were being tested. They literally started the game and then had to stop and take everybody out and test and all this kind of stuff, empty the arena. And then that within 24 hours is when we saw the NBA and all of the other major leagues, sporting leagues start to call things off, concerts, etc. So while I know that folks on the coast were dealing with coronavirus long before we were, that was really a pretty seminal moment, I think, for us to say to us as a system, we have to get our hands around kind of what we are going to do. We've been having some initial conversations around how do you kind of ask the right screening questions before you go in a home or things like that, but not to the point that we really had very clear sense of what to do. I was actually in Washington, D.C. on that day, and so I spent the following 2 days kind of working out strategies with our team, and then wasn't sure I could get home because on that Friday is when the president held a press conference, and we'd sort of actually been tipped off that he might shut down air travel. So I thought I might be driving home from Washington, D.C. all the way to Oklahoma trying to solve these problems. From a practical standpoint, we did a couple of really, really major things within a very short amount of time of the middle of March. First thing we did is send our staff home to telework, which I know many, many companies were doing. For context, some child welfare agencies already are pretty well equipped to work in the field. So they may carry iPads or laptops or things like that to do that. And so going home to work from a standpoint of the technology might not be that big of a deal. But for many states, that was really variable, and the technology might not quite be there, especially for those states that have a lot of rural area. There might be challenges with connecting to networks and those kinds of things. Before March 11th, we had 54 people in child welfare who were teleworking. And by the end of March, we had sent home 2,700 people. And so to say we had sent them home completely well with everyone having everything they needed, it would not be the truth. And I think that's probably what most child welfare agencies would say. We're still playing catch up to try to make sure that even if folks have equipment, that they really can connect to the information they need. Well, I mean, a lot of companies have been dealing with those kinds of what feels like inconveniences, but in child welfare space, where we are also continuing to receive information that maybe needs to be checked out, or that a family that may be really struggling, that we need to really understand if the child's safe, having access to historical information or information from other systems, maybe law enforcement or the courts or other systems, is critical in making good safety decisions. So it's been very stressful, not just the practical side of I was working in an office and now I'm working from home, but actually, can I even do the job that I feel like I'm supposed to be doing of keeping kids safe? So that was a major pivot for us. A second was reducing the way we did face-to-face encounters. We understood if the public health approach across the country was for people to be still for a while to try to, in a sense, flatten the curve, as we were all talking about, that meant we had to be still as well. So we actually went from about 2,200 people being, in a sense, the folks who were out making visits with children or families or foster families, to minimizing when those face-to-face encounters might occur, and going to about a team of about 300 people doing that statewide. And so that was a significant change. With that change, however, what I said to my team was, if we're going to see people face-to-face less, we need to be in contact with them more, because we know that everyone is stressed. People are stressed about jobs, they're stressed about potentially even shopping at the store, food, all these things. Schools were closing, etc. So we need to be in regular contact so that we can help families troubleshoot, whether they're a biological family, a foster family, an adoptive family. We can help them troubleshoot any kind of problems that they're running into. And so where we normally might be in contact once a month, face to face, we really heavily pushed on virtual platforms and contact once a week. And for the first time, probably ever in child welfare's history, or at least in Oklahoma child welfare's history, we had foster families by April and May saying, would you please quit calling me so often? Which is uncommon. Like, more often than not, what I hear is, I can't get a hold of my worker or something like that. So to hear from people, we can't keep up with all your phone calls was pretty awesome. And so anyway, it was a real shift. One of the sort of positive side effects we saw was actually a significant increase in parents and foster parents really collaborating together through virtual platforms around visiting kids or things like that. And so for whatever reason, we felt like foster parents really took a step in the direction of birth families in terms of grace, and really trying to help those families connect with their children, comfort their children, especially as kids were nervous about what all was going on and weren't in their normal rhythms. So we saw some really positive benefits, but that was a big pivot to go home and then to telework, and then to significantly reduce our face-to-face contact with clients. Those were probably the biggest moves that we had to make.
I'm sure if our audience is anything like me, you're hearing her answers and you're like, oh, that's why she has all these opportunities and jobs, because she's no joke. Like, Dr. Deb, thank you. Like, I love it that you stepped up, and that's just leadership. You know what I'm saying? Like, when you're faced with a challenge, it will determine what kind of leader you are. And I love it that you and your team stepped up to the plate for the sake of the kids. And again, I think even some of our mission here in this conversation is like, guys, this is one of our heroes. Like, kudos, applaud, like send the little, hand claps, on all the, as you're watching this. So, you can be a part of this and be with us and go, thank you, Dr. Deb, for loving those kids so well and loving your team well, to kind of like help them process it, because I think all layers had their own levels of stress, through that. Obviously, we know we're here, to help kids. You're here to help kids. So I want to take a little deeper layer now from your staff and from your team. and this is as a pastor, Deb, and we talked about this, like I just didn't know what I didn't know. And so when I made that phone call, when churches are about to start reopening, they're mandated reporters. If they think a child is being abused, abandoned, or neglected, we pastors need to make that phone call to the hotline, right? I made that more times than I care to count on my journey, which is some of what God used to bring me in. But Deb, I didn't know when I made that phone call and I was having to like answer all those, kind of gut wrenching questions and not knowing what was happening on the other side. I used to call it this proverbial black door. I didn't know like what was going on. Pull us behind the scenes. Let our audience, our pastors, our church leaders kind of see from your camera angle when the world is like shut down like this. So usually like a normal summer or Christmas time, it's like it's somewhat unreported. Like you don't always know. Like how can we report about what we're seeing behind the door? So let us in a little bit with what do you think is happening, or what has happened in the past in seasons like this? Pull us in behind that door there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we very quickly, once I could kind of get my staff situated and clear on what they were supposed to be doing, particularly to serve the families that we already kind of had within our system, or the foster families who were already serving in our system. We did a couple of other things to really support our foster families and our kiddos that are in group settings, congregate settings, and things like that. Once we kind of got that settled, very quickly we began to try to imagine, how do we reduce the stress or serve families who are kind of on the edge, because we know that there are many families in our community that either someone has made a phone call about, but maybe it hasn't resulted in a foster care situation, or that it just hasn't come to anybody's attention yet. And at the same time, those same families were experiencing economic hardship, again, job loss, food loss, housing instability, all these things, the stress of having your children home all day. I have teenagers, and so they actually are probably more savvy about Zoom and things like that than I am. They did their schoolwork. I didn't have to do a whole lot other than buy a lot of groceries, but I didn't have to do a whole lot else. But for folks that have young children, or children that are especially difficult to take care of, having the combination of all the various hardships combined with we're all cooped up in here together is really, really a lot. So we spent a good chunk of time in the spring and the early summer really trying to figure out, how can we reach families before they're in a spot where a child's in crisis. Simultaneously, though, preparing for what might come kind of as the communities wake back up. So practically the hotline, here's kind of what it looks like when someone calls into a child abuse and neglect hotline. And this is pretty much true in any state in the country. When calls come in, there's a filtering process or a screening process. The person receiving the call often has protocols that they're kind of walking through as they're talking and gathering that information. And in the process of walking through their protocols, what they're listening for is indicators that cause enough concern to, in a sense, empower the child welfare agency from a statutory legal standpoint to go get involved in somebody's business. Now, it's sort of when you sort of want a family to get help, you sort of want to give the state the power to do that. But the reality is, if you're sitting at your house and I showed up on your front porch, you'd want to know that I had a really, really good legal reason to do that. And so there is a sort of legal breakpoint that I think most of us want to have in terms of kind of our families and protections of our individual rights. There's this legal breakpoint between when child welfare should elevate a concern to the level of an investigation or intervention, and when it shouldn't. And so that begins at the hotline. So in our situation, I think this is true for most systems around the country, about half of all calls tend to be screened out. And what that means is the caller has a concern, they call, but we aren't actually going to respond to that family or to that situation. Another 25% or so of those calls are going to wind up with some sort of a response, an investigation, or going out and checking on a family, but not, again, still rise to the level where some kind of more serious intervention needs to happen. And the remainder tend to result in some kind of intervention. And so there's an enormous number of family situations that are processed through a hotline that never receive any kind of actual service or support to that family. I actually think it's a very broken system. And the reason I say that is I think we have, in a sense, told the public through child abuse reporting laws, which I'm a fan of, but I think we've told the public, your job is just simply report things and then dust your hands off and go on about your business because the state will take care of it. And the reality is the state is really in a very small percentage of those calls actually going to get involved with that family. So I think that's important to know. And especially in ministry where you have potentially regular kind of contact with a lot of those families, that even while there may very well be a need for a call to a hotline or concern of child abuse, that family may very well show back up on the weekend again, and continuing to imagine like how to serve that family, even as the child welfare process may be going along on kind of its own path, is really, really important. And not just sort of thinking you did something because you made a phone call, because the reality is most of those phone calls are not going to go anywhere. Of the phone calls that do, there's a lot of different ways that states respond. We are obviously going to try to work with families with children in the home, but if children aren't safe, they may very well need to come into foster care and have court intervention involved. Practically, over this last 6 months, this is true across, well, last 4 months, let's say, this is true across the whole country. Child welfare systems across the whole country saw a decline in the number of calls to the hotline by anywhere from 40 to 60%.
Wow.
And that is largely because kids weren't going to school and many were not going to daycare. In our particular system, they went down by 45% in April. And the dominant caller that was basically absent, that normally would be present in that time of year, were teachers and daycare workers. And so when you drop those two populations of, in a sense, surveillance out, you wind up with fewer calls. None of us believe that's because there's less child abuse. What we instead believe is that families are under more stress today than they were 4 months ago. And so we have no reason to think that kids are somehow safer under the current circumstances. It's more just that they're not in the community. And that being said, again, we undertook a ton of efforts to try to get to those families so that things didn't rise to a level where they need our intervention. But it is still a really deep concern for child welfare systems. What we will, what we are expecting and preparing for is that as communities do reopen and children are back in public spaces, whether that's in churches, schools, daycares, etc., that the stories of what's been happening in that home, what kind of challenges were going on in those homes, will begin to come out, and that those stories will, in many cases, translate into the need for a call to a child welfare hotline. So we're preparing for that. And at the same time, not sitting still on the fact that just because we are not fully aware of who is stressed, we're trying to figure out how to reach folks. We're also really preparing for the fact that we don't actually know when kids are going back to school. I don't know what it looks like in the places you are, but I will tell you, Oklahoma and the Midwest have had some relatively mild impacts on the community from COVID. But there is still a ton of uncertainty about if or when or how schools will reopen, daycares and some of those kinds of things. So it's not clear to us if we will see an onslaught of cases or if we will actually continue to see lower numbers. Either way, we have no doubt there are many, many families in need. And so we're preparing for trying to figure out how to serve those families and also how to be ready to receive those kids if we can't stabilize their safety in that home.
Okay, wow. Like when I heard that, my heartbeat kind of picked up a little bit, because I'm like, 40 to 60% drop in phone calls, right?
Mm-hmm.
So pull back a little bit. Like, a few months ago when all this was happening, it was like news article on how shelter in place has been affecting restaurants, right? And how I don't know about your neck of the woods, but I've had some like shut down in our city. And I'm like, it breaks my heart. I'm like, oh no, like they've had to close their doors permanently. To different, or like our local grocery stores, who are somewhat our local heroes too, have just been working overkill to try to like keep up with demands of food and stuff. And our medical staff around our communities, you're hearing about all these organizations, and yet the organization that you and I kind of like live in, which is like foster care and stuff, I was like, kind of, okay, what's going on? You know, like we're not hearing it. And as you and I were talking even weeks and months ago, I was like, yeah, we're not hearing anything because our world will be affected a lot more here, possibly in the fall, which is like, that's where my heart was skipping a beat going, oh my gosh, you know, how are we gonna be ready? Because 40 to 60% decline in reporting. Immediately I was thinking, you know, like one of the things we're going to be talking about throughout this is just how can the church help? You know what I'm saying? And I want, you know, we're going to have you answer that here more thoroughly here in a second. But right away, I'm going, guys, pay attention to your neighbors. You know, like love on your neighbors, care for your neighbors, be the eyes and ears for kids in your own neighborhood because they don't have, you know, the hotline people of daycares and teachers with eyes on them. You know, so we get to love our neighbor by just and you don't go in kind of all creeper like what's going on over there. You know what I'm saying? That's not. But like
right.
build a
No.
relationship with your
Yeah.
neighbors, and by doing that, you know, all my
Right.
neighbors, they watch this, they're going, "That's why he." No, you know, but I just think we love each other enough to like
Hmm.
to care for the kids in our neighborhood. But then you're alluding to
Well, and I
what?
think I think it's also really important for people to understand the vast majority of contacts with child welfare systems. Again, this is true nationally, although it varies from state to state a little bit. But the vast majority of reasons why families encounter the child welfare system are for issues of neglect. So it's people who have food
Right.
instability, housing
Yeah.
instability, relational instability,
Yeah.
lack of connections. Those are things that that churches are well equipped to do in their communities, or if they aren't, they should get there because frankly we're going to be in this season for a while. And we've had many churches here who have stepped up and done everything from food services to helping with child care for people and all different kinds of things, that those little things are the things that often tip a family over into the need for a child welfare referral if they aren't addressed. And so it isn't being the it's like you said, it's not being the creeper on the porch, like looking in the window saying, you know, are you beating your kid? It
Using
really is
using
the
the corner house.
basic, right? It really is basic needs of people for both physical needs, but also just relational connection.
Right.
That is what often keeps families from progressing to a spot where their children aren't safe.
I love your answer there because, like, in our language, we say level one care for churches is concrete services. And I think there, you kind of have two sides of that. Like, on one side, maybe we over, you know, like we do too many clothes. You know, I mean, in DFW, Christmas ago,
Yeah.
we had hundreds of bicycles left over from Christmas that were donated because we didn't ask the question, what do you need? You know what I'm saying? So
Hmm. Hmm.
just asking our neighbors, what do you need? If they need food, guys, let's go raise some food. If they need adequate sleeping, let's do that. Because I heard you say that word neglect. It's not just abuse, but more things come out for neglect. And even just to backtrack a little bit, I love it that, you know, your side on the government side, you know, is like the least you can do is like make the phone call or report, right?
Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
just telling you, Dr. Deb, I remember being so petrified to make that phone call thinking, I don't know what's going to happen. And so, like, from the pastoral perspective, and I was younger, you know, but I was like, should I make the phone call? And you're saying, guys, that's the least. Like, don't even ask the question,
Hmm.
should I? Yes, you should make the phone call, but then there's more after that, you know. So I love it that you're
Yeah.
kind of framing it that way. So um, I'm trying to think through my questions here, but like, um, when reporting starts, right, and all this stuff, you know, let's say we get in and kids are going to school or daycares a couple of days a week, or there's some sort of, you know, system, or churches even, you know, are starting to get eyes on kids again. Um, what do you think is going to be like a way the church can help relationally? Like you said, some very practical things like on level one, level two care is that relational support. Is there anything practically that we can help the church with, some hands-on practical things on the relational side?
Well, I mean, we're really trying to think through, you know, how to, in a sense, get ahead of and be equipped for what very well could be a flood of concerns that people are expressing as kids get back into those spaces. So there's a couple of things that I think the church really is uniquely equipped to prepare to do. I mean, without a doubt, there's not a child welfare system in the country who would say they have enough foster parents. And so there's no question that the idea of putting the issue of foster care in front of a church right now during this season where things are kind of quiet is a really interesting thing. Now, there's a lot of pastors who are worried about calling their people to step into something kind of more because so many people are dealing with their own, family situations or whatever. But I would argue this is the exact right time to call people into stepping into something more. The difference is we just have to make sure we wrap support around those families that do step up. They need help too. And I think churches are very uniquely equipped to be able to do this, whether it's especially through things like small groups and Sunday school classes and things like that, to, in a sense, almost have a group of people who are prepared to take in kids. The reason I mention that sort of as a now issue is because the need is going to arise in 3 or 4 months, and it takes a little while for people to be willing to step into that and actually work through the process. And so if you're a pastor here and you're thinking, well, we'll wait till November when it's, Orphan Sunday month or whatever, that's going to be too late for what we need, because we imagine that actually the need in child welfare to be able to place children in foster homes will actually occur before then. So that's definitely one thing. I think a second tangible thing is really partnering with schools and daycares to say, once you do get your eyes on a family, we're willing to help you with whatever that family needs. And so one of the concerns I have is that if kids go back to school 1 or 2 days a week, will the teachers feel anxious because they're not going to see that kiddo again for several more days? And will that anxiety of kind of the gap in their normal kind of interaction, level of interaction, actually cause more phone calls to the hotline, many of which, again, will be screened out? And what I don't want is my hotline to get bogged down by many, many, many calls, and then we can't sort out which ones are actually the ones that need some sort of immediate response. So we're thinking through, like, how do we work with schools so that schools have some level of comfort they've got someone who can connect with a family, whether that is relationally, whether that is through some physical needs or some combination. Often it's a combination that the family actually needs. And there's no reason in the world why churches couldn't begin to partner with schools and daycares and those sort of groups now to sort of say, hey, we want to serve as a resource for you and your families. And I actually think that would create a measure of comfort for those school administrators who are trying to figure out not only how to pull off education, but they're also worried about people's basic needs even being able to be met. So a couple of ideas for how churches could get involved right now.
Yeah, so there's a couple pieces I want to unpack there, because I want to make sure our audience captured that when you have a decline, that's one issue, right? But
Yep.
the trend, like when in the year does your team find the most phone calls, removals, and et cetera? Like what points in the year
Yep.
and why?
Yeah, they absolutely. August, September, when kids go back to school. We get often a little bit of a bump in January when kids come back from Christmas break, because they will have been gone a couple of weeks and they come back to school in January, and sometimes teachers are concerned about things they may hear. And then in May, right before school is out, because teachers that have had a concern know that they're not going to be able to continue to stay connected to that child. And so they kind of get worried about losing that connection and call at that point. So the fact that our April and May time has been decreased so much by COVID for the reasons we've discussed, then is already concerning, because you have to think that there's probably families who were really struggling in there that we didn't know about. We still don't maybe know about. But then as school comes back in August, that would be our normal peak, August, September anyway. And the expectation is that there's even more families who are in concerning circumstances because of COVID and all the economic implications, et cetera. And so that we actually could have record referrals. We don't know, but in our state, we actually had record referrals last year. We had an all-time high, and that capped 5 years of increased numbers of phone calls to our hotline. And we do a lot of exploring trying to understand why that is, but without a doubt, significant increases in concerns about the well-being of children. And so we that's why preparing for the fall is such a big deal. It's always a big deal. It's a bigger deal under COVID, where we just know that families have been dealing with extra stress that we don't really know about.
I want to make sure our audience is capturing what you're saying there. So this unreported seasons, like summer break, Christmas break, right? Where there's just less because there's no school or maybe there's no daycare. And now when you're talking, we've almost doubled the time off for summer break at this point.
Yeah.
Now you have double the amount of an unreported season, which means that, you know, when we're looking at all these societal things, how has it affected this? It doesn't seem like there's a lot, but we're kind of like, you and I feel like in this moment are kind of like sounding a forecasting of an alarm for the church and for the community right now to say, hey guys, history has shown us that when there's long breaks, there's more phone calls and removals. So when you double the amount of break time that for the summer that we've had, this fall could be an unprecedented number of reporting and removals for our child welfare friends who are probably going to need us, the church, to serve your team.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that right now too, that our audience hears that and I've told our local team, like our local pastor, like at the church at the Oaks that we attend, he caught one of our local child welfare people telling us, I think it was around August when it was just, you know, it always just increases when school gets back in. She was at a ministerial alliance with me. She went off script and said, hey, you know, our team is a little exhausted. We've had a lot of phone calls, a lot of investigations, a lot of removals, school being back in. It was something like that. My pastor, you know, Andy right here heard it, went back and got like 30 Chick-fil-A sandwiches and dropped them off at the local child welfare office of our county to serve the child welfare team. Church, hear me loudly. If you're going to look for a tangible thing to do, August and September-ish, you know, would be a great thing to do. Pile up the Chick-fil-A sandwiches, the Subway, grandma's cookies, whatever you can bring, and bring it to your local child well office because they have a potential to be, and history has shown that that season is heightened. Am I right, Dr. Deb?
Yeah, there's no question. Although you may have to find those people because everybody's scattered because of the way the work environment's
Yeah, you're right. That's
so it
good.
does make it challenging.
We'll do DoorDashes.
It does make it challenging, but DoorDash, there you go. That would work. But I will comment on something about that because we are scattered. The workers are scattered. They're also separated from their connections. And so one of the most common things I'm hearing from my staff is we miss our team. We don't know, we don't have people to easily bounce things off of. I mean, obviously you can do that virtually or by phone, but they were used to a method of being in the office together. Often these folks do life together because it's a very hard job and it becomes kind of a brotherhood. And they don't feel like they can't go home, and there's confidentiality issues, but also nobody frankly wants to hear the stories they have to tell. And so they tell each other and they're missing that connection as well. And so our own staff are struggling to take care of themselves, be healthy, be connected during this time. And so I would totally echo the idea of, as the church figures out how to support the agency that has been legally tasked with the responsibility of child safety, that in every one of those workers you support, that worker is responsible for multiple children and families. You're having a positive influence on multiple children and families for every single worker that is strengthened, appreciated, knows that somebody's got their back. And it really takes very little of that appreciation for those staff to really respond to that. So it is definitely a way to multiply. Yeah, to multiply influence right there.
A little off script, but I just felt that. I was like seeing like where you guys are headed. So I'll get back to the kids. One last little thought on how our churches can serve you well. You know, I know some of our churches like will host trainings or events for your teams around the nation in their facility. Again, that's just like not happening, but maybe there's Zoom or there's other tools that churches can do to provide for local child welfare teams. So on that note, all our audience who are from the church side, also make sure you're reaching out to our local child welfare heroes. Okay. So going to the kids, I guess, you know, you got this unreported season, you know, it's going to hit maybe stronger than ever in the fall. I love what you're saying, just to make sure our audience caught it, was now is the time, if you've been considering being a family that would open your home, going to what we call level 3, welcoming home children, either like entry level, like respite care, where you're just taking them in for a few nights, or even babysitting, where it's just a few hours. So you got babysitting or respite, or you're ready to like foster adopt. Guys, let's contact your local groups, your child welfare, your agencies. Let's get you licensed now, because in the fall, the story, one of the storylines here is child welfare is going to need more families in the fall than maybe they've ever needed in a season before. So let's start moving towards that. I'm trying to think of any other things to tie in there that we had talked about. Maybe some closing thoughts. I'm looking at our clock here, but Dr. Deb, is there any other things that we put on the table that you're like, oh, I meant to say, or any other thoughts that for the church that we can prepare? I liked your word prepare, because I feel like this summer,
Yep.
let's go splash in the pool, let's jump in the lakes and all that kind of stuff. Sure, let's enjoy. I've done that a few times in the last few weeks, Dr. Deb. It felt so normal. It was great, right?
Yeah.
So enjoy what you can enjoy in this season, but don't forget, it's also a preparation season for what's coming in the fall. So is there anything else for our audience that you'd like to say, that to prepare us, for what's coming?
Yeah, I think you're right. Summer tends to be the time we sort of all disconnect. In some ways, the thing, better for worse, the nice thing about this summer is we're all kind of often sort of stuck at home with our kind of nuclear family, and we can't get out as much. We can't get out and run around as much. So there's not a whole lot of reasons why people who do feel called to step into some aspect of this, whether it's in fostering or volunteering or whatever, couldn't actually start to progress through that where it's possible, because you're sitting home anyway, frankly. Most of us are anyway. I think that the last thing I would say is, one space that the church is in a sense the provider for really is the prayer cover for what we're doing, right? So I'm going to take my sort of like state hat off now and talk like, hey, I'm talking to my church buddies, right? We are preparing for what history tells us will happen, and we are simultaneously believing for something different that could only happen supernaturally. That's what we're believing for. And so on the one hand, I'm going to be prepared. We'll have our system as prepared as it absolutely can be. I'm asking you to step into that as well. But I'm also saying to you that we need your prayers for our system. We're asking God to do really cool things. Now, I don't know what that's going to look like, because usually I have an idea of what that is, and it's usually not what I thought it was going to be. If it was my world, I'd be like, let's not have any referrals come in. Let's not have any kids who need foster care. That would be a miracle, and it would. But the truth of the matter is, it could be that the miracle is the right kids coming to our attention, and we're actually able to help them because we're actually equipped with what we need. It could be that the right families experience some kind of intervention in the absence of that intervention, substance abuse treatment or marriage intervention or whatever it was. Those families would have stayed broken a lot longer. And running into our system may actually have been the catalyst for that change. So I don't presume to know what the miracle should look like, but I'm believing for the Lord to show up in a fresh way this year. And I'm just calling on you guys as the church, as that kind of pillar in our society that holds those beliefs, to stand with us on that, with me on that at least, and to really to be advocating for something miraculous that we can talk about 6 months or a year. Man, that didn't go the way we thought it was going to go, or here's the story of actually what happened, and it's different maybe than what history would have otherwise told us was going to happen. So that's what I'd be calling you to do.
Can we, you just straight up said we need to pray for you, so I want to do that.
Yep.
We got some closing thoughts here, but I think I'd like to pause and, kind of find out or kind of maybe pray for you here in a second. You said something earlier like the season of, just COVID and just shelter in place has been like just taxing and stressing just on everybody, right? And it can put you in a corner, where you just feel like you're backed in the finances. If you're a leader leading an organization, how do we pivot? How we do it? And you just feel backed into a corner. I've just always been wired. When I get backed into a corner, man, I come out swinging. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm just kind of
Yeah.
wired that way. And
Yep.
so I heard you kind of saying that. And I've heard from other, friends in this space in different states, they've seen families not just sign up to become foster families in this season, but they've had families step and say, we don't just want to be a foster family, we want to take in a child who is positive for COVID-19.
Yep.
What? I was like, come on, man, come on. Man. I was like, so like, I want that to be the spirit of this, audience that goes, okay, guys, this is a preparation season. I'm picturing Rocky, or Creed,
Yep.
jumping on doing the, the jump ropes right there and kind of preparing right now, that we have been as a culture backed into a corner. Guys, let's come out swinging, and all battles are won in prayer, and the victory begins in prayer. So I'd love, Dr. Deb, to just take a moment here and pray for you and some of the things we talked about, and then just have some closing thoughts for this. Does that sound good?
Absolutely.
All right. If you're watching with us, on Zoom or your Facebook, kind of pray with us, guys. Don't just maybe listen to me pray, but pray with us. Father, wow, you care more about all the people in this equation than we do, for sure. You care so deeply about Dr. Deb's team, her role, all the directors in every state in our union. Lord, we pray a covering over all the directors of child welfare in every state, that you would help them to stay healthy themselves, to stay strong, to be coming up with new ideas, to lead their teams well, to change the systems for the culture that's been changed around us, so that they can help children in a way that they maybe have never had to help them before. Be with their team's mental health and their physical health, God, as they are even being pulled out of their own community by being isolated or sheltered at home in seasons like this. Help them to lead themselves, God. There's so many things that we cannot control in life. We can control ourselves. Help all those thousands of employees in child welfare to lead themselves, so that they can be mentally, emotionally, spiritually, relationally healthy, as they give out so much in our community to serve these kids. Give them new ideas, God. We do pray for the children, Father. I love what Dr. Deb is saying here, God, and I echo it, God. You are a God of miracles. You're supernatural. And though we know that history has shown that after long breaks that there are lots of removals and lots of investigations that happen, you could shock us all, Father, with a supernatural miracle that they're just equal to last year's or less than last year's. We would look upon that as miraculous, and we would pray and believe that miracle can happen. God, I believe that not only do we pray for the miracles, but we prepare. We pray for the best, but we prepare for the worst, that maybe this is going to be one of the largest increases that they've seen. Let the church be ready. God, I pray for the church. The church will answer the preparation wake-up call that she's giving us right now. That though we need to enjoy life and enjoy the summer and enjoy some of the reopening that's happening, Father, we also need to prepare for ways that as the church, the Big C church, whether we're meeting in a facility or not, but where we, the Big C church, can respond to tangible needs at concrete level 1 or relational needs at level 2, just maybe letting someone talk or meeting somebody with social distancing at a coffee shop, so that they can have community, or that we would go all the way to level 3 and have our homes prepared. God, as we are backed into a corner, may we come out swinging in Jesus' name. Amen. I want to make sure our audience knows that, like, we love you so much. We're so fans of child welfare. I think when I was saying earlier about, the media and how I hope the narrative that our team kind of helps our audience to know how much we need each other. We need each other. And the Bible tells us that he who's without sin cast the first stone. So, if we're perfect, then we can pick up stones and just, child welfare, blah, 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 blah. But we're not perfect. We do make mistakes. Pastors make mistakes, directors, that we're in this together. And let's look for the common grounds that we love children. We want to help children, and we can do this better together. So let's make that very clear to our audience right there. We have a few things that we have to help our audience. If you signed up for our webinar through the Zoom link, you will receive an email that has a free little resource from our team. It's just a simple little top 10 ways that your church can get involved with orphan care. So a free little resource there that we love for you to receive. If you jumped in on social media or after this webinar was live, then you can actually just DM us, direct message us, or comment to us with your email address. We'd love to send you that free resource there. You heard throughout this thing a lot of different things that Dr. Deb gave us, ways, church, that we can serve. Please pray and look for opportunities to jump in and now start preparing to get involved for what is coming here in the fall and where we're at right now. Dr. Deb, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Love, again.
Well, I'm a big fan. Thank you again for the opportunity. And man, I look forward to what the next few months hold. I can't wait to see what it holds for us and for all the folks that are hearing this.
Well, thanks for doing what you do. You're a hero to us, and we love working with you. Thanks for all that you do. All right, goodbye, everybody.